Morning, everybody. Morning, everybody. Welcome to the this month's Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. First item on the agenda, of course, is item 1, apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Brown, substituted by Councillor Clark. Councillor Brackenbury, no substitute as far as I'm aware. Councillor Irving Swift, again, no substitute. Substituted by Graham Lorman. And Councillor Smith-Haynes, substituted by Councillor Patel, I thought. We've also had apologies from the Leader of the Council, who's unable to come this morning, but is represented by the Deputy Leader, who is here specifically for the item on NCC transformation. Welcome and thank you.
Sorry, just through you, Chair. Slight change in the substitutions since your briefing note was produced. So Councillor Patel substituting for Councillor Irving Swift and Councillor Tighe for Councillor Smith-Haynes.
Thank you very much. Notification of requests to address the meeting. As far as I'm aware, there are still none.
Correct.
Declaration of members' interests. Anybody got any interest? Hopefully you have a little bit of interest that is not conflicting with anything.
I collect train numbers, I don't know whether
that's really not interesting. Okay, there's no fire drill scheduled during the meeting, so if the fire alarm does sound continuously, people should leave the building for at least 20 minutes or until told it is safe to return. The first thing to announce is you will, or committee members will remember that we had originally planned 2 substantive items for today's meeting, one about transformation, which will go ahead, and also one about looking at next year's budget. We were planning to look at the items that perhaps were unlikely to change rather than just the normal savings that we get. Following members with the Chief Finance Officer, and I'm assuming everybody has seen the various documentation that went round, quite a substantive amount of things to look at there, so we've decided rather than try to hold that session today, we will have a private briefing session to look at the hundreds and hundreds of different items to try and narrow down exactly where our field needs to be before bringing it to the next public scrutiny meeting. Date of that briefing to be announced. Okay. Item 5 on today's agenda, the minutes of the Scrutiny Committee in July. This is to agree them as a fair and accurate record. Some of the points and comments that we made will have been picked up later in responses that we've received. But if you look in today's agenda, sort of page 5 onwards, you'll see quite a detailed report of that meeting, lots of points that were made both by officers and by committee members. Can I agree those as an accurate record of that meeting? Yep. Thank you. That then brings us on to the one and only substantive item of today's meeting, which is the transformation programme. And we have Paul Helsby and Councillor Bowen, who are here to talk on that item. You will have all received the documentation beforehand, so there'll be no sort of PowerPoint presentation. Paul will just speak briefly on what hopefully we've already read. The only thing I've got to say is that this is a huge and big and complicated issue. I'm hoping that we will be able to, well, myself, put it in some sort of context and get some sort of better understanding of it. Paul, please. Sorry, Liz.
Yeah, no, just very briefly. Good morning. As you know, I'm here to replace Matt, who's on holiday at the moment. Yep, I've been through the papers. I've done this elsewhere, actually, in Paul's position in the commercial environment. So I'm very interested by this whole programme, and I think it's very comprehensive, but it is quite complicated. So don't feel afraid to ask questions, and no question is a silly question at this stage in the game.
I promise I will be asking what may seem some stupid questions.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine, because no question is a silly question, because this is new to a lot of people.
Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you, Chair. Sorry, just move that. What I've tried to do, there's a number of questions in the request that I've tried to address through the papers and the slide pack. And the slide pack's intended just to support some of the narrative, to help explain that as simply as possible. I'm happy to talk through those. And the three key things that were asked was the position of the transformation programme vis-à-vis savings to date and forecast, what the implications on 2021 and how does all this kind of knit together with the Unitaries programme. So I'll talk through how I've tried to pull that together for you to explain that. And as Councillor Bowen says, happy to take questions. It is complicated, but the art of delivering something like this is to make it really simple for people to actually deliver. So once you understand it, it's easier to deliver it. And making that simple is a key requisite of programmes that are as complex as this. So I think last time I came and talked to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, it was about what we were going to do. And this is about what we have been doing. And I'd just kind of like to remind the committee of a couple of the things that I said last time. One was about getting grip. One was about having a really clear understanding of the position of the transformation programme and the projects that make it up as on a regular basis going through, so that we understand exactly where we are at any one point in time. The other was that the pace that we needed to go at and the time available, and I think I made the point that normally to create a programme as broad and as all-encompassing as the programme is, normally takes about a year to develop, to get the structure in place, to get the governance in place, to get the business cases into a robust position. And that was a challenge in the timescale. And the context of that was also about the delivery of the savings last year. So we were working very hard to support the council to balance its books in the last financial year whilst creating this programme. So that's just a reminder of some of the key points that I made last time. The information that we have is the latest information at period 4. So that runs from the 1st of April to the end of July. It's slightly ahead of the council's reporting process. That's that period 3 with period 4 imminent. We try to stay one period ahead of the council's reporting because we're reporting against project delivery, and we can measure project delivery forensically as we go through each month. And to do that, we measure it with the service heads, the directors, we measure it with the finance leads in each of those areas, and we set that against the forecast that we made at the start of the year for each project that set out a profile for the delivery of the savings, so that when we look at period 1, period 2, period 9, we're measuring it against the profile of the savings and how we thought they would be delivered over the period of the transformation programme. So at period 4, we have the actuals measured against the forecast, and we have a forecast to the year end, which is our updated forecast based on the original forecast, things that we know at that period, and what may have changed or what may be impacting on the forecast to the year end. I will say that any savings that haven't been delivered vis-à-vis the forecast, we're taking a very cautious approach to how we're projecting those savings. So I haven't seen it, hasn't been delivered. We're taking all the available information and making a cautious assessment of where we think we'll be at the end of the programme or the end of this financial year.
So, sorry, just for clarification, that's Appendix 2, page 39 onwards, those tables you're talking about?
It is, yeah. So I'll just hold it up so everybody, hopefully you've got a colour version, but it starts there, Appendix 2. So in high-level terms, at period 4, we have delivered £29 million worth of savings. That's actual savings delivered, banked, as measured against the programme where we thought we'd be, which is we're at 98%. So we thought we would have delivered about 29.5 million. We've actually delivered 29 million. So we're about 98% off the target. What we're forecasting then to year end, there's another table in there that shows and reminds the committee that the savings target at the start of the year was 41.4 million. And we're forecasting from period 4 to the end of the year that we will deliver 80% of that target right now. So we're not accepting that, but that's the forecast right now as to where we think we'll get to at the end of the year. And that is about 80% of the overall 41.4 million. The bulk of that is made up of saving shortfall from CFN, children's. That makes up about 5.8 million of that. What we've also brought in is some undelivered savings from the previous year. So we have projects and programmes that are working towards activities to transform and reduce cost. But there were about 1.5 million of undelivered savings in the previous financial year. The bulk of that was in the Place Directorate. So what we did at period 3 before the end of period 4, we designed those savings into the programme. So the savings target has increased, and that's why the gap is 8.5 million. So it was about 7 million. So nothing's changed materially overall, but what we've done is change the scope of the programme to bring in those savings to ensure we get some traction on delivering those as well. What you get in Appendix 1 is an overview of every project and what the saving was at the start of the year. And what's in Appendix 2 are the profiles of the savings, the actuals up to period 4 and the forecast up to the end of the year. And the narrative in there shows where the variance is against each project. If you just bear with me, I'll just illustrate the... So it's this slide is the overall. The black line is period 4, and you can see...
Page 39 for everybody.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
So you can see where we're starting to close the gap as to where we were at period 1. We're almost getting to a point where we're on target now at period 4, and that reflects some of the challenges around creating and setting up the programme in the period of time that we had. So, and then the remainder to the right of the black line is all forecast. That's not actual, it's all forecast.
Sorry, I've got, if we could chip in, I've got Michael Clark first of all, and then Jonathan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my reaction to having read this and what you've said is that this report is the good, the bad and the ugly. The good is clearly what has been achieved so far, and I think the existing turnaround in adult social care is extremely good, and the projection for the year is 96% attainment. The bad is clearly what we're fully aware of is the children. So the first question is, why is there such a contrast in terms of your projected achievements between adult social care and children's? In terms of the methodology, we've heard criticisms in the past of the way the budget scrutiny was done, and the Chairman articulated questions which should have been asked about the robustness of proposed savings in children's. Is that the reason that these things are being projected in the way they are? The ugly side is, if I can take you back to your forecasts on page 22, The last sentence really concerns me, and I'll read it out. Much of this in-year shortfall is caused by unanticipated delay, and in these cases, the savings will be delivered. And then comes the critical final part of it, albeit within 2020 and 21. Now, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, this sounds very much to me like kicking the can down the road, and having been a survivor of previous budget scrutinies over the past several years, we were continually confronted with huge sums, which is simply being the can had been kicked down the road, unachieved, unattained savings from past years. This sounds very much like the same language. Can you persuade me that I am wrong in that respect?
Yeah, I'll pick up the two questions. I'll just talk about children's first of all. I think a number of things happened post setting the budget. Those things were around the first Ofsted inspection was around the time of October, and that resulted in a commissioner for children's being appointed alongside the other commissioners, and then things started to evolve around the changes in relation to the inspection, the focused inspection of the MASH, the commissioner and the commissioner's requirement through Ofsted to have an improvement plan. And the improvement plan changed direction on a number of the things that were being planned. I would kind of still make the point that whilst we are off target on children's, there has been £3 million worth of savings delivered to period 4 within children's, and a number of those projects, such as equipping buildings and being able to bring people closer to back to Northamptonshire and be repatriated wherever possible. So some of those things are progressing. The target operating model and all those things that sit around that are progressing. But the whole dynamic changed with the arrival of the improvement plan, and a lot of effort and work went into combining the improvement plan with the transformation aspects of the original programme as set out in the budget savings and the development of that programme. So there has been a number of dynamics, and the last part of that dynamic was the inspection that's recently happened, where we've just had the written report, and that will generate a lot of new activity and a lot of new requirements as well. So it's a complicated picture in children's services, and what we've been focused on is building the capacity and in the management structure to be able to deliver the business as usual and improve the business as usual, and try to have an impact on the overall costs of running the service. So that might not provide the assurance that you're looking for, and I don't intend it to be an excuse. It's an explanation of the facts that occurred after the programme was mobilised. The second part around the delayed savings, if you'll recall, a number of projects had savings that were delivered full year and part year effect. So whilst all the transformation activity, if it all started on day one, we'd hope to see all the benefit in that financial year. But for example, if we've got a child that could be stepped down from a residential care placement that would be an expensive placement, and we could place them with a foster care agency or in a special guardianship, and we did that in April, and that child's costs were, I don't know, I'll make some numbers up, but say 500,000 a year. If we were able to step them down on the 1st of April, we'd get that full benefit between that cost and whatever we were able to step that child down to. So maybe we could step them down to a foster care placement, which might cost 50,000 a year. So that would potentially be a £450,000 saving. If we did that halfway through the year, we get half that saving in this financial year, and we get the other half in the next financial year. So the more we do, the earlier we do it, the bigger the impact is in this year. But clearly we can't work through every single thing and do that on day one. So the savings were profiled as to how we understood the flow of those savings and what they would deliver as part-year effects in the next financial year. And one of the bar charts in the slides that you have shows what we thought would happen around full year effects in 2021, which was about £3.5 million. The point that you've highlighted and that's making is that whilst we're forecasting to deliver 80% of the savings, that doesn't necessarily mean complete non-delivery. What it could mean is complete non-delivery, or it could mean that there's been a delay in delivering that. I don't know, it might be a new facility, it might be a delay of a month, which might mean that we don't get a month's saving in this financial year, but we still get that full year effect, but that extra month goes into the next financial year. So what we're not doing is kicking it down the road and saying, manana, it'll all happen next year. These are fully quantified business cases and savings profiles based on milestones and activities that are happening within those programs and projects that say, we have slippage, we have an issue, the issue is X, we're working hard to remedy that issue and put it right as quickly as possible, but the impact of that may well be some slippage that means the saving will be delivered next year. If we don't think the saving will be delivered next year, we're not pushing it down the road and saying it will be delivered next year. What we're saying is absolutely that isn't going to be delivered. And that's one of the key differences that you will have this year that then has been available, to my understanding, in previous years. There's been no understanding of the financial position at any point in time. And I can sit here and say that every month that there are a number of people that go through validating the activity against what the savings delivered are. And that's just one of the measures. We're also measuring quality and all those kinds of things as well. But we can give a clear position of exactly where we are vis-a-vis the transformation programme at any point in time, because we've set up the methodology to be able to do that. So whilst I understand that, you know, your learned experience from previous years may sound that comment may sound like it's pushing the problem away, that is actually a matter of fact that savings have a part year and a full year effect dependent on the point that they're delivered in the year. And slippage means that the activity may well be done, but we won't get the full benefit of that until the next financial year, and that's all that point's making.
Quick supplementary, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I listened to that. Thank you, Mr. Helsby. You mentioned 80% savings on children. I think if you look at the graph on page 39, bottom right-hand corner, you're actually pointing on children's to 43% as a total, not 80%. Okay? Which is, you know, a material figure. Going back to the original point about the budgets, would I be right in summarising what you said, that the process of setting these budgets was imperfect, and the assumptions that were made about timing, and you're talking about timing differences, the assumptions that were made were wildly optimistic. And therefore, one of the recommendations coming out of this scrutiny is that as far as next scrutiny is concerned, we have to challenge two things like timing differences and assumptions which are being made about when the timings, when the savings which you referred to, and the colossal difference between period 1 and period 6, whether those in fact are being realistically looked at. Would that be a fair summary?
Well, I wouldn't agree with wildly optimistic. No, I wouldn't agree with that either. What I would say was that those estimates were made on the information that we had available at that point in time, and they were fully evaluated against where we thought we could be in terms of establishing the processes, the procedures, the governance, the resources to deliver those programmes, and understanding where we were across a whole range of services, not just children's, and a fair number of those projections have proved to be realistic projections. Otherwise, we wouldn't be at 98% at period 4. What I would say about when I said 80%, it's 80% of the overall programme, not children's. My reference was 80% to the overall delivery of the savings. So you will see quite rightly that children's projection towards the end of the year is only around 36%. 43% on children's, but even including that, the overall projection for the whole programme against the 42 million is 80%. That was my point. Not
The problem is with children.
that's the bulk of the gap between the savings. That and the undelivered savings from the previous year make up the bulk of the £8 million. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to come back and ask you about both children's and adults, actually. But before I do, I've got Jonathan and Richard. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Right, so the first one is easy. In your spreadsheet, you've got the commission and procurement and of the additional parking charges. In that column, you've got 500,000, and that's within brackets. Sorry, well, I don't know what page. Oh, hang on. 38.
The numbered version. Are you on the appendix?
No, on the
Appendix 1.
the very end of the appendix 1, where you have all the columns are all within brackets, which I presume is showing savings. But in the column which says income proposal, you've got 500,000 there within brackets. So is the brackets a positive or are the brackets a negative? On the right-hand column, that's a negative. 38. On the bottom there, you've got 200,000, 300,000 under the car parking, on-street parking. So is that's a positive? That's an income. So the brackets, are you showing as a positive or a negative? Because on all the other columns, that's a negative, isn't it? Because that's a saving.
Yeah, they're all those numbers are in brackets.
Exactly. That's what I'm asking you.
It's the savings requirement. So
Well, that's increase. That's income. That's additional income, it says.
It is income, but what that schedule's saying is that those were all the projects and that was the saving required at the start of it. So it's an income, but the way the accountants describe income in the context of the overall budget is it contributes to the overall savings. So,
well, I'm sorry, I understand what you're trying to say, but in accountancy, it's either you've got an income, which is a positive, and it's not a saving because it's an income. So how can an income be a saving?
I totally understand what you're saying. In the context of saving 41 million, there was a number of things that were income generating or cost saving, and the way this schedule's laid out, that is just a list of all those projects. And what you'll see in the other reports is the positives where we're overachieving are in brackets, and where we're underachieving, they're not in brackets. And it's just the way that the programme's accounting has set up the numbers to report that. But the whole 41 million was made up of a number of different things.
Can I just say on that, the way it is presented is the opposite to way in a commercial business it's presented, which is why we get confused.
Yes.
I think that's why we get confused, that's why the public gets confused, and I think that's why we confuse ourselves.
It is the opposite, and it took me a while to get my head around that.
And I think that particular one, it's because it's brought forward from last year, is that right?
I think the solution there, Chair, is let's have a bit more clarity with it and explanations of what it is, because it just throws people out, threw me out.
Savings, income.
So that was okay. That's that one there. So the next one is that we got is that so 80% of the 41.4 million that you're going to save is roughly 33.12 million, which means we're going to have a shortfall of 8.28 million, which we're not going to achieve by the end of the year. So that, I take it, is going to be carried over into 2021. So we're going to have to find savings on top of what we're already not going to be spending, so the savings that we're putting in for 2021, which is going to be an increase of another 8.5 million per se, which will only grow. Because what I'm trying to say is have we taken in consideration on that percentage of savings the additional increase in overspends? I mean, we already know that children's is 7 million or something overspent already, and we're only 4 months into it. So that can only go in one direction, because you're not going to save any more money if you're overspent already. So does that 80% take in consideration what we're going to overspend in children's? And also, does it take for granted of all the areas that we're, shall we just say, how can I put this bluntly? I can't. So let's just play. So all the other areas within the organisation that we're taking money out of their budgets and reducing their budgets, and we're funneling that money into children's and adult care services, because that's what we're doing. We're reducing the budgets that we've already set for those departments to offset the costs that children's is costing us. So we're losing money there, gaining more expense coming in children's. How do you still think that you're going to achieve 80% savings? If that makes a bit of sense.
So, couple of things. First thing I want to say is that whilst we're projecting 80%, we're not accepting 80%. So there's a lot of work going on to see how we can in year mitigate those. There's also one of the schedules shows a number of initiatives that are already in train, and we're developing new business cases that will help to support bringing things back on track, partly in this year, and will have a fundamental impact in the next financial year. So whilst, and what I said right at the beginning was, we're taking a cautious and realistic forecast, because what I don't want to do as the person that's responsible for this programme is give the council any kind of misinformation or false hope. So we're taking a very cautious approach to any saving that hasn't been evidenced to have been delivered. That means between period 5 and period 12. If we haven't delivered it, we're making an assumption, a cautious assumption of how much will be delivered, and that's where we're getting at the moment to 80%. What you'll see at period 4 is that when we started at period 1, we had a big red gap, and we've been working towards how we close that red gap, and we've got almost 98% by period 4. That work and the input and the forensic nature of how we're supporting the services through the programme and the robust governance is about closing that gap on a monthly basis. Life happens, things change, we start where we are with where we think we're going to get to, and then we have to deal with the things that hit us through that process. So please don't go out of this room thinking that I or anybody else is accepting that we're only going to deliver 80%. That's a realistic forecast at this point in time, notwithstanding all the things that we can do to address that position. You are, of course, absolutely right that anything we don't deliver this year will have an impact on next year. And that was the point that was being made over here, and I make the same point. Anything extra that we can do, so we haven't got period 5, but I can tell you now that adults will be green and will be over-delivering by period 5. Anything that we can do extra in this year will have a positive impact on next year. Even delayed savings this year, whilst not ideal, have a positive effect on next year. The second part of your question, with respect, is confusing the difference between programme accounting and the normal accounting, the trading accounts of the council, which are done on a monthly basis and project the forecast to the end of the year. So the forecast to the end of the year is different to what we're forecasting for these projects, but the two sit together. So without these informing what the overall outturn forecast of the council is, that then the council's position would be worse. So the two things knit together, but they are very different. So we're accounting for projects and programmes here which have milestones and deliverables that, when delivered, deliver savings. We might have something else going on in a service that's creating a cost pressure somewhere else, but that project is actually delivering what it set out to deliver and the savings it's actually set out to deliver. So
I think what Paul's describing from this committee's point of view is currently we're looking at an overspend of £8 million, whatever it is. So the two questions for us are we confident with those current figures? And Paul, I think, is describing that they're being a lot more transparent than in the past, possibly. And the second most important question is, do we think that will change throughout the rest of the year? And if so, how will it change?
I think if I may come back, Chair. I am understanding what you're saying, Paul. However, I can't get my head around the fact that if children's on Q1 is overspent by 7 million, by rule of thumb, that means by the end of Q4 they'll be overspent 28 million, including the 8 million that we can't save equals 36 million pound shortfall. I know you're going to say that there's a simple answer here, but that overspend, if you can keep it at 7 million, then brilliant, but you can't. I'm looking at the old sort of, my accountant taught me once about the simplicity things of accountancy. Vanity, reality and sanity. And cash in the bank is sanity. Whereas, you know, we've got the vanity, we want to save the 43 million that you want to save. Reality is coming back down to saying that you can only achieve 80% of that. But sanity would tell me that if you save 50% of that, you'll be near enough the mark, because you can't see what's going to happen in the future with what overspending children comes in. It's good to hear that adults is coming now green, but the big red flag is always going to be children's. And even if you threw another 100 million at children's, you'd spend it quite easily. So is that figure really, really sensible? I would rather you come to me and tell us that we can only achieve 50% of that, and if you achieve 70, 80% of that, then great, we're in the bank. But I'm struggling to see how that you can actually achieve 80% savings by the end of Q4.
Richard has been waiting patiently, but I've got Lizzie and then Victoria, I think, who want to speak on that specific question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you remember about 18 months ago, adults was in a very perilous state as well, and through a whole load of mechanisms, that was turned round. And one of them were those, not hit squads, but basically workshops where every week everything was scrutinised in terms of the savings, and Children's have in the last 3 weeks, I think, set up a similar programme which adults are assisting with. They have an independent chair. You might say, well, it's a bit late in the day, but it's better late than never. And I think there is an absolute determination to turn this around. And I know it doesn't look optimistic, but they are at this moment in time doing everything they can, particularly with these workshops, which are particularly deep diving, to turn this around. And once that is in effect accelerating, we will then hopefully make up the shortfall. Okay? So I just wanted to say that, because that, and alongside a whole load of new ADs, particularly who are more financially focused to bring in and strengthen up the team, are starting in September, October. Again, we know it's, you know, P4, P5, it's a little late, but it is better to do it now, and from there we can accelerate. So we have to have belief that we can turn this round, and it is definitely going in the right direction.
Chair, I can understand the savings in the other areas where you're saying by going here, but what I'm asking the question is, and it's blunt, are you going to arrest the overspend in Children's? It's a simple question, yes or no. Are we going to stop the overspend, or will it rise?
Can I bring, before you attempt to answer that, good luck, I just want to bring Victoria in, because I think she wants to add to this particular discussion.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at here is there's the issue of, is Children's overspending? Have they got uncontrolled spending going on? And then you've got the issue of savings not yet made through transformation. And I think if we can separate those, we'd get some more clarity. Because when we talk about an overspend, we're thinking that people aren't managing their money well. Is the money being managed and they're spending okay, but this is savings not made? And what we could be looking at there is trajectory. So if we had more information about the trajectory. So, for example, we're talking about stepping down children. We know that would make massive savings. You know, we spend 40 million on out-of-county placements, which is considerably more than other counties. So the transformation's in place to do that. So I think if we had some more clarity about how long that would take, so if we get new foster carers, and we know we've got a foster caring campaign going on now, and we've employed somebody to do it, it takes about 6 months to get a foster carer signed up. So those savings are going to be further down the road, but then they will escalate as well. So there will be a trajectory for them. So they might be delivered next year, but then also that transformation will be designed to deliver more in an increasing amount. So I think if we had information about trajectory, it'd be really useful, but also some clarity on what is uncontrolled spending and what is savings not yet made.
So there's a few points that I'll try and pick up there. Can I sit here and give you an absolute undertaking that Children's Services will balance its books this year? I can't do that. I can give you an assurance that we're doing everything we possibly can to help the situation. SIPFA are just in the process of completing a review of Children's Services expenditure, and the findings of that will give us information about their independent view of Children's Services, which we'll need to take account of.
We didn't pay for that, by the way.
We know. Thank you. It is the absolute difference between accounting for projects and the council's accounting mechanisms for its business as usual projections. So when the council says it's projecting a £5.5 million shortfall at the end of the year, that takes into account all sorts of things, some of which may be outside the scope of this programme. And what this programme was set up to do was to deliver £42 million worth of savings, and we measure that and account for that very differently than the way that the normal accounting of the council's concerned. And as Councillor Perry says, you can have one thing happening that is affecting the costs and the running costs, whether it's grip on expenditure, those kinds of things, that is completely outside the remit of the programme, and the programme's scope is quite defined and quite clear. But what we do as a programme is we don't walk away from those things that we identify that we could actually bring some grip and control to. We hope to flush those out through the team, the resources that we have, the business analysts that we have looking at all these things. And wherever we can identify something that comes out of the behaviour, the performance, the results that can be improved, we'll look for an opportunity to improve it and reverse the trajectory and improve the situation financially. So whilst we're delivering defined projects and accounting for those defined projects, we're also looking for ways to improve that would form the basis of a programme that helps us continue the direction of travel in following years, and for the benefit of the two unitaries that exist beyond the life of this council. And for their benefit, we have to make sure that these vital services are sustainable and affordable in the long term. So whatever we do now to improve that situation has a long-term effect, and it's not just about the short term, whilst we do have to balance the books in each financial year. So the council's reporting gives a trajectory. So at each period it says where it thinks it's going to go, and it gives an overall trajectory, and each one of those services has its own trajectory. And in the similar way, we have these programmes and projects where we know forensically what we've delivered at any point in time, and then taking a projection. So our projection to the year end is based on 42 million. The council's projection is based on the wider budget of 500 million net. So they are two very different things, but they have to interlock. So without the transformation programme, you could argue that we wouldn't know where we are, and we wouldn't have £29 million worth of savings, so we'd be looking at a much bigger gap than we are, and that doesn't excuse the gap that we've got or the gap that we're forecasting. But it's my job and all my colleagues, the corporate directors' jobs, to address that 80% delivery and turn that green by the end of this financial year, and that's what we're all working to do. But I take your point that why don't I say it's 50% and then everybody's got we've got a bigger gap then. And I'm saying this is a realistic projection based on all the information that we have across the organisation at any one point in time, and that's saying 80% delivery. So, feel free, if you want to say, well, I only think it's going to be 50%, let's plan for the worst. But where do you take that? So we have to use the information that we've got available at the time. And this goes through governance as well. So the other part of the programme is the governance. So we have the Transformation Board. These results go to the Transformation Board on a monthly basis and on a fortnightly basis in between the monthly ones. We're dealing with how to close the gap. So we have a results board and then we have a board that looks at, we did a deep dive into place. We did a similar piece of work around children's and as Councillor Bowens mentioned, what that's resulted in is, and Councillor Perry alluded to it as well, is the ability to look at the cohorts of children and say, how much are we spending on children in residential placements, and could their lives be enhanced in a better, different placement, and then what capacity have we got to step that young person down into a different placement that results in better outcomes for that child. And the old adage is, doing the right thing is always the cheapest thing to do. So we're focused on doing the right thing for the child because that will look after the money as well. But what we have to have is an infrastructure in place to be able to step children down to. And that's not just internal foster carers as well, it's the external market and how we work with the external market, which might be more expensive than an internal foster carer, but it's still cheaper than a residential placement. So all that work and those panels to look at those children are taking place on a weekly basis now, and that's something we've introduced as part of the transformation programme.
Thank you, Paul. And you've touched on, and Councillor Perry, is something that I want to explore a little bit further. But before I do, Richard, you've been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, no apologies. I think it's really, I like the style. I like the inquisitive and giving each speaker an opportunity to go through their arguments and their thoughts rather than just have one question and one supplementary. So no need to apologise. And of course, it ticks off a lot of stuff that I was going to say, which is really, really good. Saves me speaking. Well, maybe for you, more better for me. First of all, savings to date. You look at the graph, and there must have been an incredible endeavour in from May to July to get that to 29 point. So well done. I think that just shows that there is when you put the and identify those areas that can be fixed are being fixed. And so, although I'm going to go on to optimistic and false hope and all the rest of it about projections in a minute, but there's some evidence that we can, with some endeavour, we can do some good and close that gap. The first question I've got, and it's probably my ignorance here, but the projected savings at the moment is 33.2 million. Let's just go on the 80%, because that's all the evidence tells us that's where we are at the moment, and may well be through performance we can get better to that. So how much does that cost? Transformation must cost something. So how much does the savings of 33.2 million actually cost? That's the first question.
There is a section in the report where I've described the costs. If you just bear with me, I'll just flick to the page. Overall, the transformation programme team costs is about 2.7 million, but there are wider costs as well. So there are some capital costs, which traditional capital costs, where we've looked to refurbish buildings to repurpose them, which we've done some of. We've looked at how we can use flexible receipts, use capital receipts flexibly, which is a permitted investment in transformation that has savings attached attached to them. So there were a number of things at the start of the programme that were set out in the programme, and the overall flexible use of capital receipts, which includes the cost of the transformation team, was 6.5 million. So if you said that the 6.5 million and we get to trying to do the maths in my head, but if we get to the 80%, you know, the return on investment would stack up in anybody's language. If we get to the 42 million, I think it's about a 6-7 to 1 return on investment, and that's in a very short period of time, and that doesn't take account of the savings that will be delivered as the full year effect in the next financial year. So when I talk about 42 million, the savings that are being worked on and delivered are in the region of 50 million with the full year effect, and that full year effect, as I alluded to before, is the thing that we're measuring all the time as well, to see how we can maximise that, and we're introducing new projects and, into those programmes all the time to help to try and do that. So the overall cost of delivering the transformation programme, 6.5 million, and then there's some traditional capital being used to, mainly about repatriation and changing the use of buildings and refurbishing, modernising, adapting, those kinds of things. We're also investing in technology as well, so there's a couple of things around called Brain in Hand in adults, and there's around the use of assistive technology to reduce care packages. So the single-handed project is saving a lot of money, and what that basically is, where somebody requires 2 carers, we're adapting their home to put in the technology to help one carer be able to manage the situation in that person's home. It improves their independence, makes their circumstances better, and again, it's the cheaper thing to do, but there's equipment to invest in to be able to do that, and that equipment can be reused in different locations when it's not needed. So if somebody comes out of hospital and need a hoist to get out of bed, we've got the equipment, we can support them to do that. When they can get out of bed on their own, we can move that hoist to somebody else. So those are some of the things that we're putting in place that cost money where we use traditional capital.
If it helps members, there's more details of costs on page 22 and 23, item 7.
Thank you, Chair.
So I always get told off for going into the tactics, and I'm trying to keep it very sort of strategic. So 6.5 million is the total bill, or you're saying there's additional monies? As a ballpark figure, it's 6.5 million invested, and for that, hopefully, we'll either get 41 or 33, depending on performance.
It's more than that.
That's correct, but then there's the traditional capital, which
Sorry, so what's the total, when you add it
so the traditional
roughly?
capital is another about 6 million. Okay. But that is long term. That's not just related to delivering the savings in this year. That will continue to deliver savings in future years.
Okay. And the transformation team, 2.4 million?
Yeah. Sorry,
so it's about 10 million in total?
Yeah. No, that's included. The transformation...
14 million. No. 6 and 2.
No, the transformation team is included in the first 6 million.
Oh, okay. Because it's paid for by flexible use of... Okay.
Yes.
I think for simple people like me, I like to see what bang I get from a buck. And I do like to see, like, we're investing 12.5 million, albeit some of it may go over to the next fiscal year, I understand that, but that's roughly, and this is what we're looking at saving. So you get an understanding of the differences. Does that make any sense?
Totally agree.
And this is public money, so it's understanding when I explain it to my constituents to say, well, actually, it's about 12, but we're getting this, and some of it will go over to next year. So I think clarity and transparency on figures are important.
So, Richard, can I interrupt? Can I ask one question on that? The transformation team, 2.4 million, is that an ongoing cost? I mean, obviously the capital stuff is just a one-off this year only. Presumably the team will continue in place.
Yes, so when we set up the programme, we didn't have confirmed, and when we went into the setting the budget and finalising the programme, the unitary programme was supposed to go live in April 2020, which would have meant the end of life of this council. We've now got an extra year and an extra challenge in terms of how we balance the budget. one of the ways that we balance the budget is to continue with the transformation programme to realise savings in the next financial year now, which wasn't the intention at the start. And I'll come on to a bit about how we're integrating into one programme to deliver the North and West unitaries with transformation, transition and so on, which it was one of the questions that you'd asked me to cover in the presentation. So to answer the question, that the people in the transformation programme were recruited on the basis of they were either existing employees or recruited new to the organisation on fixed-term contracts to cover the period of the transformation programme, which was at the time it was about 18 months. So we have the opportunity now with the LGR programme to look at how we do that differently, but it is the absolute intention to continue on the transformation journey, because that's what underpins the long-term viability and sustainability of the critical services. So if you forget the organisational structures, NCC, the two unitaries, the residents of Northamptonshire will still expect these services to be delivered, whoever's delivering them, and the more sustainably we can get that position to being fully funded as we walk into opening the doors in the unitaries, the better. And that's the challenge and the role over the next, I think it's about 400 I think it's about 400 working days to vesting day. So the challenge is to make all those vital critical services high performing and sustainable financially. And that's the whole emphasis of the LGR programme now. It's a transformation programme and not just a safe and legal programme for April 2020.
So, yes.
Thank you. And I suppose it's just really a presentation thing. And I look at graphs I can understand. I can pretty much, once it's explained, sometimes when you put a narrative and a load of figures in front of me, I don't quite understand what the final figure would be. And it's just trying to get, and it's a request perhaps through the chair, that when we have just you can give us a ballpark figure of everything included, and then put a narrative underneath to sort of explain how it goes through the years. But to really understand crucial numbers are really important to me in understanding my responsibility to scrutiny. But right, the next question is slippage. Slippage is, you talked about where you find slippage, and for me, just some reassurance that the slippage is not being caused by a reluctance for change or a culture and a refusal to change culture. Have you found that when you obviously did this bit of intense work between May and July this year to get that, to narrow that gap, is the slippage purely down to, well, what is it down to? But my concern is specifically a reluctance to change or a culture not to change. Can you reassure us that those two aren't present? Thank you.
Okay, so one of the clues in the programme is that we've focused on a role of change manager, and each programme has a change manager, and we've been recruiting change champions from the frontline services throughout the process. We've got to nearly 100 change champions now, and that continues. I'm not going to sit here and say to you that any of the issues are totally devoid of cultural and behavioural matters that are a legacy that we're dealing with in the organisation. And that's part of my kind of reasoning around that a programme like this takes a year to set up properly, and we didn't have a year to set it up. So I don't want that to sound like an excuse. It's just a matter of fact that, and what you're dealing with in that period of time is working with people to help them understand why we need to do something, help to show them how we're going to do something, and then encourage them to behave differently by showing different leadership, measuring things differently that drives different behaviours. So if you measure something in one way, you'll get a specific behaviour. I believe that by setting targets, you influence behaviour, and that could be very counterproductive. I'd much prefer to use measures, because measures allow you to understand what's impacting on what it is you want to deliver, and then you use those measures to change the things that you identify through that process. So behaviour and culture change is a massive part of any transformation programme, and the whole programme will be littered with things where we have identified behaviours that are a result of the culture that, you know, the chief exec and the senior management team are all working towards changing the direction of, but it doesn't happen overnight, and people have to see something different, believe in something different, and leave something behind in the past, and that takes time to do.
So that's good, and I'm glad that there is a acknowledgement that that's probably the biggest challenge, to be fair, isn't it, when it comes down to actually changing, and you have mechanisms to actually challenge that. Okay, the final question is about this. Both Councillor Eakins and Clark raised this about projection and budget setting. You know, I want to be optimistic. I really do want to be optimistic, but that ship has been torpedoed so many times. Working here because we sit and we counsel and we scrutinise people during the budget season, and everybody is quite bullish. Yeah, based on the information, we've done it differently this time. We definitely know we're going to be on target, and then all of a sudden, you know, we get a situation where people are grossly overspending because the budget wasn't set in the first place. And you talked about, you know, we don't want to give false hope, but we want to be optimistic. I think what we need really is this injection of absolute realism, because we have to let the public know, even if it's absolutely bad news. I would rather us do that, understanding exactly the great challenge. I think Councillor Malcolm Longley is a classic one, of being Mr. Doom and Gloom. But I really get a sense of feel that the challenge. Sometimes I get a feeling that there is too much optimism and a little bit too much false hope. You said yourself, you know, don't leave here thinking that we're only going to be 80%. The reality is that I'd rather us go and believe that and then be pleasantly surprised. I think it's this business that Councillor Eakins talked about underperforming and then over-delivering. Under-promising, over-delivering, that sort of thing. So the question is that I know it's difficult. Projection is, and I don't do budgets. That's why I drove around in fast cars and nicked people, because that's a lot easier to do for me personally, and I haven't got that intellect. But with regard to that approach, do you feel as a transformation team that you are being realistic with regard to the challenges and not setting us up for a failure? Does that even subliminally in some of the things you say, sir?
I think he's already said that actually this is based on an overly cautious projection. So I think in the past, possibly we have been overly optimistic and therefore not have achieved. I think this is possibly going slightly the other way, but it is better to be more cautious with a view that hopefully we can achieve the end outcome. So we hope to achieve more than what was actually on paper here. Would that be fair?
Oh, always, yeah. Always hope to deliver more. If I could, thank you. Yeah. So I'm in the middle, if you like. So what part of my role is to help people believe they can do this, and that's part of the change in behaviour, and breaking things down into bite-sized chunks so people believe that they can do something. If you say to somebody in a service, we've got to save £5 million, off you go and get on with it, they'll probably not. They'll just be totally phased. So one of the things that I do and we do is break those down to easily understand for people. So we might say something like, you know, if you're a social worker, all that means to you in your caseload is if you shaved £10 a week off each case you had, that would do it. And I'm using an example there, but that's a way of how we help people to believe they can do it. Because part of this is kind of people I'm talking frontline people now and middle managers, not believing that the size of the financial challenge and that they could actually achieve something so quickly. So to achieve 29 million after period 4 really helps that. So where I'm in the middle is, yes, I need to be absolutely realistic. I need to be realistic with you all. I need to be realistic with the programme board in what we think at the time, and the programme board can delve into detail and ask for detail to be checked, and they do, and all those kinds of things. So it is a fine balance between being cautiously optimistic but also realistic. And to put all that into context, we had to address 3 financial years in the last financial year, which amounted to 60-odd million. We're about £5.5 million short of the forecast for the end of this year. That, to me, whilst we've clearly not cracked it, shows progress. And all we can ask for is a direction of travel that shows progress throughout and continue to make that progress through. So it's whilst it's not ideal, I don't like to sit here seeing red at the end of this graph. We're not accepting that there's going to be red at the end of the graph, but realistically there could be, and we're managing and mitigating that fact. So it's not about saying we're here and it's going to be 80%. It's less of you and it's more of me and the people in the organisation that can do something about this, to actually know where we are so we know what we can do. And that's all that this does. It gives us a basis to know what needs to be done, and then it's up to us to do it to address that gap. That's this report in that very simple graph. There is a lot of work that goes behind that. Every single project has one of those, and the milestones and the objectives and the tasks all feed into that, so that we know exactly where we are, so that we can do something about it. So it's not to be able to project to the end of the year that we think we're going to be 80%. It's to know that we need to do something about it.
Can I just finish off that? Yeah, just with regard to where we've gone and where we've come, I think we also have to acknowledge that part of the reason we've been able to travel down to 5 million is because of government allowing us to use funds from other sources which we wouldn't normally have. So it's not just down to transformation, and so we've got to be careful about the message we're sending out. We were helped a lot. We're now on our own, and this is down to us now to deliver the final bit. And the final question is, when I first saw your presentation, when you first presented, there was a man with fire in his belly, all right, and a guy that was on a quest. Is the job more difficult than you thought, and is the fire still burning?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll let you into a little insight. I don't like programme management. It fits into the category of doing the boring well, but it's really important, and I understand the importance and I understand how to do it, but I don't like doing it. What really excites me is I like mending things that are broken, and this was broken and still needs some mending. And that's what gets me up in the morning. And you know, it's not about, for me, it is partly being able to balance the books. But what I said before was, doing the right thing is always the cheapest thing to do. And for me, my quest is to try and do the right thing. So I know that we've got a number of children that could just go home, that could be in a better placement. And if we can do something through our shared efforts between the guys in my team, the service, and working together to affect that, then that's what really motivates me. And whilst we've got children that still could go home, whilst we've got adults that we could maintain their independence longer, I've still got fire in my belly.
Okay, thank you. I still have a number of speakers who've indicated they wish to speak. Before I come on to them, I'd like to ask committee members to start considering what conclusions we may wish to draw at the end of this session, whether there's anything to take from here that we want to think about or pass on. I mean, do we, for example, are we going to be confident that the weekly panels, that the project board that Paul has been discussing is enough to address the 80%, 20%, the 5 million, whatever it is that's overspending? At the start of the meeting, I spoke about how complicated this whole issue is, and we've heard, haven't we, about the overspends in particular in children's, although I would highlight adults as well, although adults are mitigating their pressures from other aspects in their budget. There's still clearly some big pressures in adults that have caused overspends in particular lines of their department. But in children's, we're here to discuss transformation, i.e. the project to do things differently this year and next year and in the future, and the savings that we're trying to be achieved by that. But it's already been spoken about from Victoria and yourself that some of the financial pressures isn't necessarily about those transformation projects not being delivered. It's about the forecasting that Richard was talking about service pressures that had, for whatever reason, not been accurately considered. So I'm just trying to get my head around, when we talk about the overspend in general, how much of that is about the transformation agenda not being delivered, how much of that is about these other pressures that may or may not be mitigated and may or may not bring further problems throughout the year?
Okay, well, clearly they are related. So the transformation savings and the forecast shortfall and the council's overall outturn position are related, because without the savings, the council's position would be worse, and if we delivered all the savings, the council's position would be better. Period 3, the council's position was forecasting about, I think it was about 5.6 million overspend. Period 3, period 4 is due. So there is a direct correlation, but there'll be probably 1,000,001 things around the detail in each of the services and the areas where they'll net each other off. So there'll be something that's underspending, there'll be something else that might be overspending, and the accountants that manage the day-to-day business will have a much clearer view than I will on the nitty-gritty of the detail in there. And as I said earlier, the more that we can do around transformation in this current financial year helps the position this year, but it also has a bigger, as we get to September, has a bigger impact on next year. And the work that's been done in children's to start to try and address that is around how we step children down and how we stop children coming into the system as well. So if we're able to move children into lower cost placements with better outcomes, that doesn't mean more children aren't going to come into the system. So we have to create a system to ensure that we prevent children coming in. And that is a bigger system issue, which has huge opportunities with the unitaries. It has opportunities with health and social care integration, because working forensically to make families stronger so children don't have to come into care is where the real benefits are. And you may have heard of the Stronger Families programme, which is a national programme about building capacity and working closer with those families to build that strength so that we don't have to take children into care. And that's the huge shift that needs to be made across the system. And it isn't just a problem for Northamptonshire. Many children's services are facing similar challenges.
Okay, this is where it gets complicated, because we're partly talking about your role, transformation, and we're also sort of straying into the sort of general service delivery, and this committee has obviously had sessions and will continue to have sessions, particularly with children's. I guess, again, for the committee, we've got an Appendix 1, this whole list of different transformation projects. It's difficult for us, I think, to look at that line by line and understand each one. We need to sort of try and grasp what the overview is like. But again, I have Jane, Jonathan, Victoria and Graham. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, we've heard quite a lot about children's services, and clearly that is one of the most fragile budgets that we're dealing with in terms of the budget delivery plus the fragility of the service itself in looking after these young people in our care. Moving towards transformation and a children's trust, can you, and how confident are you that in 7 or 8 months' time the service will be in a fit state to move to a children's trust? We will have 4 new assistant directors in post. They'll have been in post 7 or 8 months. You know, how long does it take for somebody to get their feet under the table to know what's happening? You know, a lot is in the programme to happen within the next 9 or 10 months in children's services. But Councillor Perry has also mentioned the day-to-day delivery of the services on the ground to the children that we already have in our care and the social workers that are already dealing with ongoing cases. And then there's the infrastructure, the structural changes that need to take place to make the whole service better, more efficient. You've talked a lot about children coming back into the community, reducing the costs, these very, very high costs of children in placements that are not necessarily the most appropriate for that child. You know, huge amounts of transformation involved there, and all to be done within 7 or 8 months with new staff and a system that is broken at the moment. Although, you know, there are measures, we've heard this morning, you know, these weekly meetings, the very tight looking at budgets and delivery each week. You know, that has only just started, 3 weeks. You know, that's not going to make a huge difference within the time frame. I'm really, really concerned about a children's trust in 9 or 10 months' time, well, less than that now, 7 or 8 months' time, being fit and secure to look after our children within the county.
Before you answer that, and this may just be me sort of misunderstanding, I think this might be what I was trying to hint at, you know, the difference between transformation, your role, and the actual children's service delivery side. Are we getting into, I mean, you tell me, are we getting into an area where we should be asking them, perhaps?
Yeah, clearly, you know, there are people far better qualified to talk about children's services than I am in terms of, you know, what has to be done around safeguarding and all those kinds of things. So, whilst I have worked in that area as a senior manager operationally in other places, that's not really for my job here. My job here is to support them to deliver transformation through a well-structured, well-thought-out programme and provide the additional resources to help change whilst the business as usual resources carry on delivering business as usual. So that's the whole kind of ethos of what we're trying to do here, is that additionality to help facilitate change. And, you know, I would say that the trust is part of the transformation journey. And what it has the potential to do is accelerate some of that, but it doesn't guarantee it. And clearly, the more we can do before the trust comes into being is beneficial for the children, but also for the council. So the more transformational activity can be put in place, the better. But it's not going to be complete by the time the trust starts operating, and that journey will have to continue through the trust, and that will be part of how the council exercises its management control over what that trust does as a wholly owned organisation of, well, it'll be this council and then it'll be the 2 unitaries.
Okay, I just want to bring James in for a second.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, to reiterate some of the points that the Chair has made that others have picked up during the discussion. The intention with today's agenda item was to focus on the transformation programme, which is a programme of distinct activities to deliver some identified savings. Clearly, there is also wider transformation, perhaps small t rather than capital T, going on at NCC generally, in Children First Northamptonshire, as has also been highlighted. And the point has been made that the delivery of the transformation programme will contribute to NCC's overall position and will be a part of overall change. But as I say, this agenda item was intended to have a specific focus on the transformation programme, you know, the progress that's been reached by this point, the projections for the future, and as the chair has highlighted, potentially giving the committee an opportunity to reach conclusions about its confidence in the current position, its confidence for the future. The committee will no doubt continue to look at the transformation small t of NCC generally, of specific areas, principally in children's services, as it goes on from here. But that broader focus, that broader transformation was not intended to be the focus of today's agenda item.
Any follow-up or?
Only ready to say what I understand what James is saying, but I think some of these issues are so interwoven that they cannot be separated. And everything is interdependent. The budgets for children's, for adult social care, all the rest, affect the transformation. But also we've got to think about these high-performing services that we are aiming for. That's what the transformation should be about, high-performing services in the end to the people that we represent. So I think they are absolutely interlinked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think all of us agree that whatever happens, however it happens, the end result is, how our residents are benefit from the whole thing. Jonathan.
Thank you again, Chair. I agree with Councillor Birch on that last thing. Yes, we are here to scrutinise the progress made with the transformation, but also part of that is the impact that transformation is having on all the other services that we deliver at NCC. And the deep and robust scrutiny that we're all doing here today, I think, is part of that, and it is an essential thing of how it affects the other services that we deliver. Children's being the biggest one as it is, but I, for one, think that any overspend in children's, I don't think there's one person that will disagree that we have to spend it as long as we're making the children in Northamptonshire safe. But we have to make sure that it's realistically beneficial to do those cuts. The main thing I want to talk about, Chair, is going back a little bit. And I know what's saying is what Councillor Organ was saying about, come from where we came from, where we are, and where we're going to. Something way back in my deep brain cells, where I do believe that the capital money that we're getting from the government is actually, although I think we had something like £20–30 million less last year, I think this year, 2021, it's not as much, it's around about 8 to 10 million or something like that, less, or somewhere, I might be wrong. But what I'm trying to get at is, although you said that transformation has cost around about 6.5 million so far, I'm a realist. If we spent 6.5 million, we saved 7.5 million, we still made a saving of 15%. That's good. If anyone could get a return on an investment of 15% is brilliant. So just so that you've done the transformation team has actually saved 29 million to date is exceptionally, and they should be congratulated on doing that and for the hard work that they're doing. And that's excellent news, that is. Although we'd rather not have to save anything, of course. So I would just like to know is, once we make these savings going into 2021, which is we're going to, is the effect on the budget that we're actually going to receive? We start off with. So this is where we're going to now. We finish out at 1920. Hopefully, again, brackets, we balance the books, whichever way we do it in the accountancy terms. What we want to say is going back into 2021, we maintain the transformation working, because it seems to work and it's looking at everything where we can save. And how is that actually going to affect 2021? Is it going to be a positive, or are we going to just stay on the level plane?
Yeah, as I said earlier, everything that we can do this year and continue to do has a positive impact. And where these programmes, I said earlier, where they take about a year to develop, what normally happens in where I've been responsible before is we create the programme, we start delivering the programme, and we start working on the next year's programme so that we do get that year in front. And that's what part of the team have been doing. Part of the team are working on delivering this year, but the business analysts are looking for other opportunities. One of the things that you did ask me to kind of talk about today, and we haven't really covered it, was how transformation in NCC will fit with the LGR programme. So that question probably plays into that now. So we have a bigger opportunity now, so we can look at in the context of what's done in the county council across the other organisations, and have one integrated programme to see how we can drive quick wins through that process of integrating, disaggregating, aggregating, and any quick wins that we can identify as a collective, 8 local authorities, is very much part of what we must do and should do going forward. So I'd say that brings an additional opportunity. What we have to do is integrate the two programmes. So the NCC transformation programme delivers transformation. There'll be other aspects of transformation that needs to be delivered as part of creating the 2 new unitaries, and we have to do the structural changes that reduced from 8 organisations down to 2 organisations. And a couple of the slides that I've put are the governance structure that's in place to deliver the unitaries, with the design board, Teresa's role with the chief execs in that accountability for delivering programmes of work and portfolios across the whole range of adult social care, health and social care integration, all those things that need to be delivered to create the 2 unitaries needs to come together so that the sum of the parts become greater. And the governance structure with the design board and the leaders oversight board and the joint committees is the forum to be able to develop and implement those things at pace within the timescales that we've got. So we're not just thinking about what do we need to do for NCC, but it's about what do we do for the residents of Northamptonshire. Just park the 2 organisations for a minute. How do we make this better for the residents of Northamptonshire, that everybody can sit back on vesting day and say we've done something we can be proud of, that it's better, and that's really important. And we've had business rates pilot investment as well, which is helping to develop business cases to sustain the implementation of the unitaries. And some of that money has been invested into children's services to bring forward some of those things that will help to make the budget sustainable, help to step some of those children down, put in the infrastructure and the resources in place to go forward. And likewise in adults as well. So that's all really positive, and by integrating into one programme, that to me gives us an ideal opportunity for us all to get behind how do we do the best we possibly can do for the residents of Northamptonshire by creating 2 organisations and leave a legacy long into the future that addresses the things that we're seeing now as we should see them as short-term issues, that we achieve long-term sustainability and improvement, and that's all our jobs for the benefit of the residents.
If I may have one more supplementary. That's good news. That's good news to hear. Can I just ask one final question then? And on your transformation, and you're looking to 2021, and obviously on the radar, I would say in the far future will be 21-22 when we transform to 2 unitaries. Is the transformation team, is it looking into areas where joint delivery of services may be more, shall we just say, financially sensible between the two unitaries once they're formed? You know, if we have a service, say for instance highways, would that be better to be delivered jointly between the two unitaries rather than being split into two separate entities? That sort of thing is what I mean. Are you looking at that as well?
So the programme's set up in phases. So we're in the discovery phase at the moment, where we're looking at all the data. So the financial data, the people data, the service quality data across the disaggregation of the county council and the aggregation of those services that sit in the districts and borough councils. And once we get to the end of this kind of discovery phase, we'll go into a design phase then. And the things that you're talking about are decisions that are not in my control. My role will be to present the facts, but I won't be making decisions about whether we have one of something or two of something. At the moment, the premise is that we're creating two separate organisations that will hopefully work together. I'm sure they will work together for the benefit of the residents. But what those specific decisions might look like around whether one's providing a service to the other, or it's a shared service that sits somewhere in the middle, or, you know, we have a decision forced upon us with the trust. So that'll be one organisation delivering to two accountable new local authorities. That's one decision that's been made that we didn't necessarily make, but it's been made. So those decisions aren't for me, and I can't give an assurance, but the only assurance I can give is that we'll look at the economic benefits and the customer and service user benefits of all the options as we go through the discovery phase and start getting into design and start to work with the design boards, the leaders boards and the governance structures that are in place, who will ultimately make those decisions based on the evidence and the information that they have in front of them.
Thanks, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. It's probably just me again, but again, the word transformation, we've got two different things here, haven't we? We've got transforming NCC services, i.e. doing them differently, doing them better, improving them, and then transforming local government reform across all the councils. Sometimes the transformation word can be used to mean different things. Clearly, local government reform will bring about some big improvements. I think everybody will understand the efficiencies that can be transformed that way. I suppose my thoughts are about the NCC transformation. We're doing all this year, we're doing all next year. At some stage it has to stop, it must be finite. You can't continually transform and improve services so you can make millions and millions and millions of savings every year. You're nodding, so okay, that's something that you are aware of. I mean, could you comment on that briefly? And then I've got Victoria, Graham and Chris.
Yeah, sure. That's teed that up perfectly for me. My role in life was always to be to design myself out of a job. Transformation is only necessary when in certain situations and circumstances. If you study the best organisations, whether private or public sector, they're the ones that have the capacity to continually improve. So it's that plan, do, review, change, plan, do, review, change cycle, where they make small changes on a daily basis based on what's happened on that day, on that week, in that month. That didn't quite work. Let's see how we can change it. And when you get a culture and a set of behaviours and the right leadership and the right operating models and the right circumstances for that to happen, it's really powerful. And that's what we should all be aiming for. Transformation should be one-off and temporary for a specific set of circumstances, and I wouldn't advocate transformation as a long-term. If there's a transformation team in the new unitaries, we've got something wrong. That leadership team in each of those organisations should have the capability and the capacity to continually improve. And it's that drives performance and is at the heart of, putting residents first in everything that we do.
Two questions, Chair. One is, you talked about our culture here in the staff, and that's one of the issues you're having to deal with in terms of delivering the transformation and the change. Do you think our current HR function is robust enough to give you the support that you need to make the changes to the culture?
Well, with respect, I don't think I should probably answer that question, Councillor Perry. In my experience, I've had every bit of help and assistance that I've asked for, but to answer that question is not something that I'm going to do here.
Okay, I'll read into that what I will. But the other one is it's really just a question about the, again, in terms of risk and contingency on the sleep-ins. So that's a very big figure, isn't it, 3.7 million, that on the sleep-in payments you've been able to take that out because the court ruled that we didn't have to pay it. But now it's under appeal. We're back in exactly the same position we were when we put that contingency in. So why are we taking it out?
That was a service decision to make that call, not a transformation decision. That was, you know, a point in time and a decision, eyes wide open about the potential risks around that.
And that's something we discussed during the budget scrutiny, wasn't it? So, but people take their own view, I guess. Okay, Chris? Oh, sorry, Graham, I do apologise.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was going to ask about Section 9 of your report, but you've covered a load of that already, so just a couple of small points. I was slightly concerned when you said you were still looking at possibilities for working on the LGR programme and how it would dovetail with transformation. And of course, you said there's 400 days, whatever, working days. So a bit more timescale on how those two are going to work. And of course, we've got the third lot of reorganisation of shared services, which I won't say more about because I'm not sure how much is public, but that has got to be taken into account as well. So that's another work stream for your teams. So perhaps you could, where possible, you could give us a bit more idea on timescales and how that will affect the other bits that you're doing.
Yes, so I didn't quite understand the first part of your question. Could you just clarify what you meant on the first part, please?
You said earlier that you were looking at ways of working the two, the transformation and the LGR together, but that implied you hadn't got to that point yet, and that, you know, with time's ticking, and you know, how much is there still to do you were talking about, isn't it?
Sorry. So what I was referring to was in terms of looking, that there are always opportunities now that we're working together. In terms of the overall LGR programme, we understand what we have to do and the timescales that we have to do it. What I was referring to are the potential to secure quick wins through that as we identify them. So as we start into we come to the end of the discovery phase and we start to validate all that information, we'll be running lots of workshops with bringing services together, looking at the opportunities, and those will form part of the design phase. As we go into the design phase, the designs will be agreed through the governance structures in place, and then we'll create implementation plans for those two designs. There will be two unique designs, one for North and one for West, but we have an overall timeline and a programme plan for the LGR programme. What we didn't have when we started the transformation programme was that integrated programme, or even a view that there might be an integrated programme. We were working on the county's disaggregation part of what was a safe and legal programme to implement a vesting day on the 1st of April this coming year, which, given such an aggressive timeline, there was a maximum amount that could be done in that time. And with the year going back, we've got time to do more transformation, to make services more sustainable. Or the only point I was making was that we don't need to wait till vesting day 2021 to identify things that we can do in the short term quickly together through good working together, building good solid relationships, and all wanting to do the right thing and understanding what the right thing is to do as we get consensus building through that stage of the programme. Yeah, I can't say too much on shared services because I don't think there's a decision been formally made yet as to the nature of what the outcome of the, I'm assuming you're referring to the LGSS review. Clearly that will have an impact on the programme of delivery for the unitary programme, and how those back office services are delivered in the two new organisations. And what we need to understand is what the decision is, what the requirements of the two new unitaries will be, and then what's the journey to get from where we are to where we need to get. So until we understand where we are and what the decision is, we can't work out that journey and what the decisions that need to be made quickly, need to be made in a few months' time, and need to absolutely be sorted out tomorrow.
Okay. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Paul, for all the answers so far. I'll try and keep this as short as I can. Firstly, congratulations on the recent announcement that you're going to be becoming the new Unitaries Programme Director. I have a concern, which is what is the effect going to be of that appointment on the delivery of transformation at Northamptonshire County Council, which is what we're here today to talk about. Presumably, whilst the transformation programme is moving over into the LGR programme, will there still be somebody internally at Northamptonshire County Council who's responsible for delivery of that programme, or will you be the person who is answerable to the council for delivery of that programme?
Okay, so Teresa and I have had the conversations. We are putting in place, although we haven't identified or recruited a person yet, we are going to bring some capacity in that will do a lot of the day-to-day things that I'm doing here and pick up that capacity. Ultimately, I'll still have responsibility for the delivery of this programme because it will be one integrated programme. So as the programme director of the local government reorganisation programme, it will still have overarching responsibility, and the person that we bring in to bring that additional capacity and focus here will still report to me. And no doubt Teresa will want a dotted line to her as well, because that's you know how Teresa's importance is weighted towards what we have to do here, whilst overall she has a responsibility now with the other chief executives to deliver the LGR programme, and I'm their resource to help them do that. And we are strengthening the existing programme teams across the LGR programme so that we can soak up the additionality of the work that's required to deliver the two unitaries on top of the transformation journey, and not just the transformation here, but the other parts that we can transform around back office services, around customer engagement, around the IT systems, back office IT systems, customer relationship management systems. How we transform the whole customer experience and journey is all part of that, to which I'll be responsible for. So I'm not walking away from the responsibility, but the next one of these you might have a different person talking to you.
Thank you very much for that. Moving to the issue that Councillor Clark referred to earlier regarding some of the forecast shortfall in the delivery of transformation savings in the current year, and the phrase that much of this in-year shortfall is caused by unanticipated delay, and in these cases the saving will still be delivered, albeit within 2021. So that's on page 22. But looking at the spreadsheet on page 40, we can see that, for instance, under the Children First Northamptonshire programme, there are a number of I'll call them, yes, projects, which have a description line against them, no delivery anticipated in 2019-20, and they total £3.3 million in CFN, and there's some smaller amounts in place, which seem to have, whilst they don't have the same description line, what the description says means almost exactly the same thing. Is it the case that all of those lines will be delivered in 2021, or are there some that are just not deliverable at all?
Yeah, and that's what we're working through right now in between period 4 and period 5 to validate what the whether they're technical issues, whether it's about a building being ready, whether it's about the ability to deliver something in that period of time. We're working through all those now, so we'll have a better understanding by period 5 of when the savings from those will start to flow. So what we're trying to do is see how much of that we can bring forward and what we could do to bring it forward, and being really clear about what we won't get this year, but the foundations need to be done and the programme and the project needs to continue, but the savings won't actually start to be delivered till the next financial year and when in the next financial year. So that's the other piece. And then the final piece of that is, what should we just stop doing and we need to start doing something differently, because that's clearly not going to work. And it's that agility that we need in the programme to say, look, we thought it was a good idea, we tried our best to deliver it, it's not delivering the way we thought it was, or a circumstance has changed, or the Commission has decided that, you know, they're going to do something different, or we've got a trust that wants to do X and we have to do that, and so on. So a whole number of things there but the 3 things that we're working for are those 3 things that I've just said, and then we'll be really clear about what we're just going to stop, and we'll close that, we'll do the usual lessons learned, and so hopefully we don't repeat that same mistake again. If it was a mistake, sometimes it's just the external environment that we have no control over can change, or it could be something that we do have control over that we can do something about.
Sorry?
No, I'm just going to say I'm going to have to leave, I'm afraid, to go to another meeting, so I shall just leave you and carry on. Yeah, okay.
Chris?
Thank you. So from that answer, I think I take that at least some of those projects that are causing the shortfall may prove to be undeliverable, and that therefore other projects will have to come forward to fill the gap. And this is perhaps what's being referred to, for instance, in the paragraph on page 22 about mitigation activity. So that, you know, it's ongoing development of new transformational projects. Would it be a fair, given the timescale you just laid out, of looking between period 4 and period 5, would it be a fair assumption, therefore, that those new projects will feature as part of the budget for 2021, when that is the draft budget, when that's brought forward? I think September, October, I can't remember the exact timescale now, but sometime fairly soon. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the working assumption, so that we're trying to prepare whatever we can prepare in that time scale to be ready for setting the budget. But what we won't do is put forward projects that potentially haven't got a robust business case at that point in time. So what we'll take forward are those that we've got a robust understanding of the deliverability of at the point in which the budget has to be set. And of course the budget has to be set sooner than when the financial year starts. So we still have an opportunity to continue to develop those things and do the work and continue with transformation beyond the budget setting process. So that's the only point I'm making really, is that yes, we have to lock down what we can lock down and build that into the budget, but that doesn't mean we stop at that point in October, November, and then ultimately in February and early March when the budget is formally adopted. That will continue, but it'll continue as part of the LGR programme and looking at the whole rather than just this part of it. Obviously, adults and children's are a very big part of the LGR budget for the North and West unitaries, and we have to do everything we possibly can to make those sustainable into the future. And that's where Anna and her team and us working with Children's and the Commissioner and what might get carried forward and delivered by the Trust. And the Trust should bring an injection of new management team, and it'll have a board who should bring relevant sector experience to that as well.
So those new projects, as and when they come forward, will they be something that you'll be applying your no data, no project, no point mantra to?
Always.
I love that phrase, by the way. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I've got councillors Julie Davenport, Michael Clark, Jonathan Eakins, and then after that committee, if you wouldn't mind, start considering any conclusions, any final thoughts that we have. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. I do feel for you. I mean, up against this sort of wall, constant wall of cynicism, and I think a lot of us come from that place, especially those that have been here for quite a while, because this has been going on for quite a long time. Even I'm becoming a bit cynical, and I haven't been here that long, so it must be difficult. And to take on another challenge, I don't know. So, anyways, the savings that have been made, so been brought forward from last financial year to this financial year, and also the savings that we're making this year, how much of that includes like the one-off section 141, you know, when we couldn't, have I got that right? Yeah. 114. Yeah, I'm a bit, with numbers. So, yes, section 114, how much of the savings came from that, which, as I say, is a one-off, so cannot be carried forward into what we're doing now, and how much were transformation? Also, I'm really pleased to hear someone say that you're, forensically drilling down, because I've always been told that we've got to look at the higher strategic level. But I was always taught, if you look after the pennies, then the pounds will look after themselves, and we do need to drill down on that. So I did have, as you can see, I had questions on every single item here. However, I'll stick with some big ticket items. So the social workers conversion, converting their contracts, what we wanted to do with roundabouts, they haven't happened so far. We haven't been able to deliver those. So I was just wondering how that is going and how we can go forward with that. And also with the PFI, how is that going basically? I know that we were quite successful with relatively successful with schools, PFI, but what about, with the social care? And there does like...
Sorry, Julie, before you do, are you able to answer those sort of questions? Or I'm just wondering whether they might be better placed at the relevant directorate themselves.
Oh, well, they're down here as a transformation, so I thought that it's down...
Yeah, well, maybe he can.
Well, yeah, they are listed as part of the transformation programme. If it's adults that, Anna would be in a far better position than I would be to talk through the absolute detail of those things. In terms of roundabouts, the delay there was the contracting process to get the right partner on board, and that took longer than we anticipated. Then that partner gave back word that they didn't want the contract, so we had to go back out to the market again. So there's lots of little detail behind that isn't all at the kind of forefront of my head. And then there's some really big things like the adults PFI, which is a very complex set of circumstances that Anna and the service, with our support, are making good progress against, and some are going faster than others. So.
We were going along, how positive you felt from what feedback you were getting and being told.
I think I've kind of covered that throughout in terms of the overall projection. So the figures that you see in there are the projections for the programme and where I think it will be at the end of the year, which make up that 80%.
I think, Julie, you're absolutely right in drilling down into the detail, and it's not enough for this committee just to be looking at the strategic overview. But I think all the items on Appendix 1, those list of different things, it might be better for any committee members who have individual questions to contact the service directors directly for a full detailed answer. We need, I think, to, unless you disagree, I think we need to consider the transformation project in its whole and the way it's operating, those project meetings, for example, that you discussed, whether we believe that that is the best way forward to bring about what we hope will be the end result. Just my thought. Sorry, could you use your mic, please, because of the...
Oh, sorry, yes. There could be good news. Well, I don't know, but did I read it, or was it just a good, nice dream, that government are going to give more money to Secretary of State, as announced is giving more money to local government?
Well, I guess we'll see that at the end of the year when...
Next week. Next week.
Oh, next week, is it? Oh, well, look forward to that. Don't hold your breath, I think. Okay. So, Julie, you finished, yeah? Okay, thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as possible. I think a lot of good stuff has come out of this discussion. This morning, I come back to the expression that I think we have generally a glass half full view of the way forward. I say that because looking at this in the round, a year ago, this council was faced with a projected shortfall on budget of, I don't know, it was something like £30 million. It was colossal. I'm encouraged by the fact that at the end of the last financial year, the books were actually balanced. Congratulations to the officers and to Councillor Longley and everybody who contributed to that. So it can be done. Having said that, we are still battling, as you're battling, with ways to confront this projected deficit on children's services. There may be a solution there that is disguised, which we haven't come across at the moment. It's very effectively disguised. But I feel confident that where there's a will, there is a way, so we will find our ways through it. What I'm conscious of, Mr. Chairman, is that we don't find ourselves in this position in a year's time. Because from my experience, I'm sure the experience of other councillors, we are always in reactive mode. That's to say, you know, we're going back and asking the question, why is it that this has happened? It has happened, and we've got a problem, Houston, and we have to do something about it. But we are scrabbling around trying to find ways to get a patch, a fix, on a problem which has occurred during the year. My question to you is, I'm basically someone who believes in good preparation and anticipating problems as far as we can. I've always been, I won't say critic, but I've always been sceptical of the robustness of the budget setting process. Because assumptions are made, there aren't enough notes given to a scrutiny, we give cursory time to discuss certain huge big ticket items and then spend a long time on smaller ones, and things get nodded through on a wing and a prayer. And then, in August sometime the following year, we're trying to clear up the mess because a false assumption was made. So, in a question, Mr. Chairman, is this. Are you and your colleagues in the transformation area of the Council going to be more proactive in scrutinising more forensically the budgets which are set by heads of service for 2021 and asking the sort of critical questions which perhaps haven't been asked in the past to enable us to stress test them before they even come to scrutiny, but to make doubly sure that as far as possible we've asked all the questions and you've involved yourself in the transformation process so that in a year's time we're in a position where we're looking perhaps at a neutral position where we've actually got 100% and we're preparing this council for a more favourable transformation in the entirety to the two new structures of the two new councils.
Well, I will let you answer that, although I appreciate you have already perhaps answered part of that anyway. But it's a valid question, and Michael, you might want to consider your final conclusions depending on what Paul says.
So we will absolutely run, we call them robustness sessions. So as the business cases go through an iterative process, we hold various checkpoints where we do robustness. And we did that last year. As again, the timescale that we had to do that robustness is normally where you take a period of time longer than we had last year to do that. But we absolutely do have that checkpoint from a programme perspective around assurance to the Transformation Board that they are as robust as they possibly can be in the available time that we have to set the budget. So the nearer those business cases come to being finalised to setting the budget, the less time we have to do the robustness. So what we're trying to do is to develop projects within the programmes sooner, and you'll see on one of the appendices there is a list of some of the things that are being worked on. That's not an exhaustive list. There are other things happening as well, and all the time at first stage we're doing reviews, and then we build up the robustness, and the people that are involved in the robustness sessions aren't just transformation. In fact, they're probably very little transformation resource in the robustness sessions. The robustness sessions are normally made up of the 151 officer who chairs them, the finance representative of that service area, so the business partner for finance, so whether it's children's, whether it's adults, and they will be doing work all the time with those services to validate how those savings are going to be delivered and how they fit into the context of the overall budget. And then we have our programme benefits realisation accountant who works with the service to identify the mechanisms for releasing those savings, and it's the difference between kind of cost avoidance and actual savings and understanding what that might look like. So whilst cost avoidance is good, it might not necessarily deliver a budget saving, so we have to understand those things. Those are all the things that we do through the robustness process. Some of that's informal and some of it's formal, where we have check sheets and the 151 signs, and they go through that process.
Just a very brief follow-up to that, Ms. Ellsworth. If, looking at the situation as it is at the moment and the corrective work that's being undertaken, if we rewind things to a budget setting for the current year, which was done last year, in your opinion, do you think that any of the causes of this serious overspend in the children's sector could or should have been foreseen?
At that point in time, it's easy with hindsight, isn't it? But at that point in time, we were doing as much of the checking that we possibly could. I think I arrived at the middle of October, and the budget was being, the first round of the budget was being produced in kind of November. So we were working through robustness through that kind of November period through to the finalisation of the budget in February. And we followed a process where we had all the right people involved, asking all the right questions. I think I showed you a template that we used when I last came here that showed the key lines of inquiry around those robustness assessments. So we did all those things. But there's also, as I said earlier, a number of circumstances that changed around the Commissioner's arrival, the need to produce an improvement plan, all those kind of things. And we've ended up with a number of plans that need to be consolidated into one direction of travel for children's services that brings all those things together to lay the best foundations for the trust as possible. So in my opinion, we did everything we possibly could do at that point in time with the information that was available to us at that point in time.
Thank you. And I think having that understanding of the robustness process, or whatever you call it, will help Councillor Clark and others consider how the budget is being prepared for next year. Jonathan, and then that will be the last speaker, if you don't mind, and then we'll have a little chat about what conclusions we may or may not have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, heading this item into its final conclusions. Paul, congratulations on your new role. Can I just ask if there's an undertaking from yourself and your team, is that there's a seamless handover to whoever takes the lead role, that you use the same data sheet or the same song sheet, so to speak, and and to ensure that the momentum of the transformation that we've started and continues on track, and I'd like to think without deviation, but I think it will be more prudent to say without any major deviation from where we started from. It seems to be, rolling along quite nicely, and we just need it to ensure that it continues. So that's the question I've got, is, as far as you can give, is that assurance that whoever takes over the prime role is using the same sheets that you're going to hand to them.
Yeah, of course, we want to recruit the right person that can do that, and that, in my view, there's no reason to make a massive change of direction around this. What we need to do is just keep doing what we've been doing with the rigour and robustness that we've had into it. And if they can bring any new and fresh ideas, then fantastic. That would be much welcomed. But the direction of travel is set out in the transformation strategy, and their job will be to continue to develop and implement the transformation strategy. And I will still have oversight over the overall direction as part of the LGR programme.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, that brings the evidence-giving session, shall we call it, to an end. But I would now like to give the committee the opportunity to consider any comments or recommendations or conclusions that you wish us to make along to Cabinet. We also perhaps need to consider individually any further information that we would like, either formally as a committee or, as I mentioned, Julie earlier, by all means email specific points on these things. Anybody, any comments on what we've heard today? Nobody? Richard?
Sorry?
I
was wondering if Paul's free to go and do some transformation.
Oh, sorry, have you finished?
I'm happy to go if you want me to.
It's a public meeting.
Run more you can. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Right, I'm going to... sorry, can you stick your hands up again? I saw Richard first of all. No, Richard,
Sorry, yeah, I think that I suppose my concerns is relating down to the projection of the 8.2 million shortfall. And I think somehow we need to highlight that, but also try to encourage whatever went on from May 19 to now to close that gap from to 29 million, just 5.5 million short of where we should be. Then that surely has got to continue, unless the projection has taken into account everything that was done since May to close the gap, and we still think we're going to fall short. But I think it's a big worry. It's also about the Cabinet needs to be aware that if not transformation, where does the 8.2 million come from? And I don't think it's good enough just to say, well, it will be passed over to the next financial year. That leaves us 12 months for unitary. So we need to look at other ways of trying to... So that needs to be on their radar with regard to what contingencies to recover this 8.2 million, which will end up being on the black, and we need to ensure or on the red, is it? On the red. And we need to ensure that they're aware of it and deal with it, personally.
Okay, I'm going to assume that James is able to articulate all of that. If anybody disagrees with anybody's comments going forward, speak and we'll have a discussion. Otherwise, I'll happily move on. Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. I mean, I think we've really had a good session today, and not only is it good questions, there are robust scrutiny as well to dig down into where we are. Needless to say that the actual transformation team is, I think, actually doing an excellent job, and I think we should reiterate that in writing to them, so give them a bit of encouragement, because that's what we don't think many officers get at the moment. But yes, I also concur with what Richard was saying, is that we must make sure that these numbers being quoted are achievable and that they're also beneficial. There's no point in saying, well, we're going to make these savings, if services or other services are going to be at a deficit or at risk of not delivering what they should be delivering. And also, because I'm sure that other people have other things to say about things, is I would like to ensure that one of the recommendations is that there is that seamless handover, and that the momentum is continued within the transformation with whoever takes that role over. And it's good to see that Paul will have oversight of it, whatever happens. But we need to have it working properly and continuing the same. I think we've previously at council here is that we start one project and then all of a sudden is the lead officer or whoever, should we just say, moves away in whatever way it is, and then we start again. We seem to be going backwards rather than forwards on a continuance as a smooth pathway. Sometimes it seems that we could put obstacles in ways to actually prevent things happening properly rather than just keep it going with the momentum.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few other speakers. One thing you might want to consider is whether these weekly panels and project boards are likely to be the best way forward, and whether we want to have any kind of knowing about what they get up to somehow. I don't know, just a thought. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with everything that has been said this morning. I think it's been actually excellent scrutiny work done here this morning, it indicated. And I'd like to take Jonathan's point up that we ought to really thank Paul and his team for where we are now. Because if we go back 12 months ago, which Michael was a bit concerned about, is that really the damage had been done before Paul got here. And I think this year we're not in that position, which is good for everyone, basically. And I think I take transformation on a more lighter way of looking at things. I believe it's like making a cake, believe it or not, transformation. Make it easier. Because it's no point me or others going out to the general public trying to explain these figures, facts and figures, which they won't take in anyhow, because they haven't got the indication to do that. But making a cake is easy, because we all know making a cake is what you need is the ingredients. You've got to have good ingredients to make a good cake. So that's the first step that we do. But making sure also that when we start making the cake, that the temperature and time that we put it in the oven is also correct, which is another step forward in our transformation. Because at the end of the day, we want to make a nice cake, don't we? So we can share this with others. So that's the last thing. So a very simple, but I think quite effective way of trying to explain transformation, because the general public out there, bless them, you know what I mean, aren't really up to scratch like we are on these subjects. Because we never heard this word last year, did we? We didn't hear the word transformation this time last year. We was all in the dark, weren't we? But now we do. Thank you, Chair.
I do wonder maybe we should recommend that Councillor Golby be sent to British Bake Off or something. I would also, it's rather remiss of me, I was busy writing when Paul left. I should have thanked him very much for his contributions today. I thought that was an excellent session, and he handled all the questions well. James, perhaps you could pass that on to him. Julie Davenport.
Thank you. Same as what Councillor Clark said and some of what Jonathan said, that, you see, maybe it's me, but I would like to know, and maybe it'll be good for the transformation team to know exactly where they are, what point they're at with this, because I read it all, I got loads of, but I didn't get that surety of, that, like Jonathan said, are we going to get that? I just feel quite cynical. I hear a lot of words and I read a lot of words, but I want to see the breakdown. And I know you say that I can email, you know, different people, but I would have thought it'd be good to have the information in one place. Or is there?
Can I answer that?
Have I missed it?
If that's all right, I can answer that. There is actually, for every project, there is a dashboard. And I don't know if that's available to members.
Oh,
but each project has got a dashboard. But you wouldn't normally give that level of detail out. But if there's a particular one that you're interested in, I'm sure you could request a copy of the dashboard.
I imagine the detail behind that for every single line, it must be a huge piece of work. But that's a very good question. Do we have access to that if individual members want to do it? James, do you know if that's available anywhere, or would we have to ask for it specifically?
I'm sure it's not in the public domain, Chair. It's not information produced for that purpose. It's open to the committee to request it, as you can request any other background, in inverted commas, information. I think that would best be done centrally through democratic services rather than by individual members making individual requests. So, and taking the point also about the amount of information you end up that ends up being involved.
I'm assuming that this is one huge spreadsheet document. No, it's not. Each one is separate, is it?
I think, as far as I was aware, each one's separate. So
okay.
whoever's in charge of transformation in the Cabinet now would probably get access to that. So I'm sure Democratic Services could liaise with them. I mean, you wouldn't want every single one, but on a very big project,
what I thought,
it's just worth asking the question. If it's already available and it isn't like lots of extra work.
Okay, well, what I was thinking, if it is one huge document, it might have been possible for us to have had the latest version of it sent as an example, and then once we've all seen that, we might then know later what we would want to...
So, sorry, through you, Chair, is the request that Overview and Scrutiny Committee members have access to the dashboards, unless that would involve a vast amount of information, in which case we can come back to you and ask you to be more specific about particular ones that you would like.
Agreed? Sorry, can you use your mic, please?
Sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking of big ticket items, like I mentioned, you know, just so try and...
The idea is... Sorry, James.
Sorry, for talking across you, Chair. So, if I understand correctly, you have from page 28 of the papers onwards, you have Appendix 1. You have a list of each of the transformation programme projects. So there is potentially a dashboard for each of those, which is several pages worth. Councillor Davenport is referring to the big ticket items. It would be useful to have a bit more specificity, a bit more clarity about what big tickets means in this context.
I would suggest we ask for all of it, unless it's impractical, then we can have a further discussion, as I think you were suggesting earlier. Okay, you put my glasses on. Jane.
Thank you. There's two things that I think that I'd like to sort of just raise, really. We're at the point where the easy wins have been probably achieved. To save more money is going to get more and more difficult, and the cuts are going to be deeper. Just to pick up what Jonathan alluded to earlier, the fact that the deeper the cuts, the more risk the services are at. And there's a huge pressure to reduce the spendings, but probably what has been done so far has not been easy, but they are the easier. It will get more difficult. So I think some of these projections are possibly a little bit optimistic. And what was my other point? I think that is probably it. Oh, yes, the weekly project meetings. I'd like to see the format. I'd like to see how their, what their brief is, what their agenda is, if you like, or even sort of minutes as a result. Do they have a progress chart? Do they have a spreadsheet? What is a flow chart?
I agree with that. I think it's very important for us to be confident that however that process works, it is working. And to do that, we have to have some sort of understanding of it. Going back to your point earlier about the deeper the cuts, the more potential risk to service delivery, to impact rather. It's not only the cuts, it's the deeper the change in services, the deeper, the alterations, the transformation. The more you do, the more risk there is to that service. So that might be a point worth making as well.
I think it's a risk. The deep, as we move forward.
Okay.
With that,
I've got Victoria wants to come in, I think, on that specific point, and then I've got Michael, Richard, and Chris.
It wasn't on that specific point, so.
And you'll go to the bottom of the list then. Michael.
Bearing in mind Councillor Davenport's comment about cynicism here, I will certainly own up to being totally disruptive in everything I do, because I think challenge is a very healthy thing in political life and in business life. Cynical, perish of thought.
Long may it
I
continue.
just wanted to make a point about where we are with the council, and it's just a pity, such a pity that we didn't have, as I think Councillor Eakin said, this process of transformation several years ago. I think where we could be today if we had embarked on that journey. But a transformation is really a journey and not a destination. It's something I think the council's got to embrace as long as it exists and carry through the work that's being done by Mr. Helsby and his successor. In the past, we've veered in the direction of laziness in the way we have sorted out our affairs. And I say that because we had reserves. And the cop-out position was to use reserves. And we know where that's led us to. In a perverse way, I think it is healthy in a perverse way that we don't have any reserves. So the council doesn't have any options but to confront the situation it's in and to cut its code according to its cloth, which is what many of us said it should have been doing some time ago, and it didn't do us a good career-wise. However, that is where we are, and that is not a bad thing. I come back, Mr. Chairman, to the recommendations. I've banged on about this before since I've been on this committee as a substitute. I do think it's important that in preparation for the next round of budget setting, the process is improved. The preparation is improved. And that means that any organisation which is to excel has to rely on quality data, quality information, and to have the assumptions in those figures stress tested as far as possible. Here's my questions to Mr. Helsby about his input there. So I would like something recorded to the effect that the information provided to scrutiny as we approach the budget scrutiny is more detailed, it is more robust, we have more notes to the budget saving lines, as in a set of accounts. The key things are the notes, the assumptions that have been made, and how officers have gone about red, green, amber, whatever categorisation or system they want to employ to form the conclusion. So we're provided, as scrutiny, with much more robust and stress-tested data than we have been in the past. And the reason I say that is I simply come back to the point, we do not wish to be here in a year's time doing the same thing, trying to reinvent the past and ask these questions, why did this happen? Why did we make this assumption? Why wasn't it picked up at scrutiny? And so on and so on. So it's a question of process, Mr. Chairman. I would urge that we put something in as an action point to this meeting, that the budget process and the preparation that should be addressed. We should have some sort of improved template for the way we go about our affairs.
Agree entirely, and I think the budget setting of next year needs to be done in a far more different way, and certainly from a scrutiny point of view. Also agree entirely with your point about reliance on reserves. Councils up and down the country were being innovative and imaginative, and we seem to have got our heads stuck in a certain place, and it didn't really help us. Other councils were doing things, and we weren't. I was taken and pleased by Paul's talk about how transformation would continue, about how councils need to be flexible. There is, I think in local government, it is easy to get stuck in your ways, as talking about a second ago, and being flexible and adjusting and changing all the time is clearly something that we should encourage. Richard.
Yeah, it's just moving on from Councillor Clark's point, and whether it went as far as I would want. I don't know whether it's possible for us to mention that when it comes to budget setting for the next fiscal year, that there is direct collaboration with the transformation team, because they must pretty much know what is and what is not possible. And that really, so instead of working in, I'm sure they'll do this, but instead of working in silos, that when people are setting their budgets, there is some sort of quality assurance by the transformation team to look at those lines, to say, well, actually, from our experience from this financial year, that ain't gonna. So what we get at the end of the day are lines that have been through some sort of Q&A. Does that make any sense? So, you think they do?
Ben's not in,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So for this year, so whether we can just mention that as an idea, which goes along with Michael's point of giving a tactic to possibly.
Okay. James.
I'm not sure, Chair, whether the transformation team have that role. Clearly, you've heard today about oversight arrangements, the robustness with which proposals developed. I must admit I wasn't clear from the discussion whether that was referring specifically to transformation projects or draft budget proposals as a whole. Having said that, what would seem to cover all the bases would be for if scrutiny to say it would like to see the same approach applied as for the transformation project across the draft budget as a whole. That would cover whether that was then done by the transformation team or whether it was done by someone else because it's outside the transformation team's remit, but in the same way.
I think this is what I've tried to hint at a couple of times. It does get a little bit confusing, and at the end of the day, we don't care what it's called. We only care about results. So, however that happens, absolutely.
Chair, I think it's about organisational intelligence. You know, what is the intelligence out there with regard to these lines? You know, there must be a number of departments. I don't know whether they do it in silos, whether they do it through, whether they do it, but are they doing it sideways? And are they looking at organisational intelligence and memory when it comes down to say, and we just want reassurance that that's being done, okay, whatever format it looks like. That was my first point. My second point was about was about culture. Now, I didn't quite grip the question that Councillor Perry asked. Yeah. But whatever it was, it certainly was mentioned when I asked the question that was an issue, and it caused a little bit of awkwardness with regard to the question being answered, maybe rightly or wrongly. I'm not going to make a judgment on that. But are we sure that the culture and behaviours, there are mechanisms in place to robustly challenge that? Because if that is quite a big barrier to transformation, that's going to be a really difficult thing to achieve. So are the Cabinet convinced that the processes in place to challenge culture and behaviour are working and are in place?
Well, if we're not sure, maybe we are not yet convinced. From the exchange we had, I wasn't convinced that and I don't know how big the problem is either. How big is it? Well, we can say that. Sorry, Victoria, you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I'll pick up on that. That's my fault, really, because I asked that question very clumsily. It isn't quite how I wanted it to come across. One of the biggest threats to transformation is change management. So transformation is aspirational. The biggest threat is not having the buy-in from the people or ability or whatever it is to actually deliver that. That is the biggest threat. And Paul did mention on a number of occasions about culture and embedded culture and working to change that. But that is something that isn't as controllable as other things. And to change culture and behaviour in staff, you have to have robust performance management systems in place to do that. So my question would be, do we have those robust performance management systems in place? So if someone's resisting change, for example, you can only really manage that if you've got a performance management system. Now, as I was aware, I think that's very varied within the organisation as to how well that's delivered or if it exists. So I was asking that because you need that to be able to manage people effectively. But I think he was quite right to not answer my question because I specifically mentioned a department and I think that was, I would agree with him for not answering that. So it was just a more general discussion that, how can we guarantee that we've got the buy-in to deliver the change that they have as an aspiration?
Okay. Chris, then Jonathan again.
Thanks, Chair. So I've got two things. And so the first one is I think we have to emphasise that with Paul's move over to oversee the unitaries programme and the appointment of a new director of transformation, that there must be no let-up in the pace of transformation or indeed in the way it is currently being delivered. So that covers your weekly meetings, things and stuff like that. That absolutely has to continue as it is now, if not to be stepped up. And the other thing is there's clearly an issue in the current budget, and it's an issue that mustn't be carried forward to next year's budget because it's the final one we'll set, and if it is carried forward we'll be passing on a problem to the new authorities, and that is the issue around the robustness of some of the proposals in terms of around one, whether they were deliverable at all, and two, whether the amount that was proposed as a saving in the current year was actually deliverable, and that's around timing and whether you get the full year saving or not, and that must not be allowed to happen in the 2021 budget, because it's going to be out of our control then, and someone else is going to have to pick up the pieces, and you can't set up the new authorities to fail on day one because you hand over to them a budget deficit that they've got to deal with. So whatever robustness process is in place, and Paul talks about a budget robustness assessment team, that they have to be ensuring that the figures in the budget are deliverable as far as is humanly possible. I get the issue around you can't control demand totally, and it's not about that. It's about if someone says, here's a saving, we can deliver a full year effect, or we can deliver 6 months, or whatever it is, that must be something that is absolutely deliverable.
I always get wary, and I think all of us have seen, big round figures when it's 1 million or 500,000 or 400,000. It makes you, and invariably they're proven not to be the case. I mean, I wouldn't want it pounds, shillings and pence, but you do worry, don't you, about the figures that are put forward sometimes. Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with what you were saying about the flexibility and adjusting and change, but that's changing culture. We're hopefully moving from a culture of spend to, with the transformation coming in and highlighting areas where we can, shall we just say, make it a little bit more efficient and more deliverable. At the same time, I mean, I think it was somebody mentioned the last stab that this was done with the new Next Generation Council, which gratefully I think I wasn't here when that happened, and a few people here remember it well. And we have to keep away from that as much as we possibly can. As I think Councillor Clark said, how much money was wasted on that little venture, which has probably put us into the position where we are now. But I think if we can just ask for a little bit more clarity on the way that the spreadsheets are presented, so that we can understand what is defined as income and what is defined as savings. That will be a lot easier for us all to understand. And also, it's really, I think, encouraging to see is that with the transformation in progress as it is now, is that we are going to protect the areas of highways, the areas of children's, even ensuring our libraries still run, because they're statutory requirements. By law, we have to keep those running and we keep those provisions going. And I think that with the transformation that it is in its place, is ensuring that continues. And I think that is what we have to come out with at the end of all this scrutiny process, to ensure that those, shall we say, I'd like to say guarantees are given, but I think that will be not a good thing. I don't think anyone's going to give a guarantee at the moment, but I think that we can actually be guaranteed that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, okay.
And that those statutory, well, it's the statutory services that have to be protected.
The Cabinet will make decisions over those things which we may or may not disagree with.
Decisions, Chair.
Sorry?
Those are member decisions.
Yeah.
Transformation won't have any.
Yeah.
Well, no, but transformation actually guides us into us making those decisions to make sure that we have the money there available to do it.
About what may be delivered, but yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed. Right, James, do you have all of that written down? Are you able to cobble that together for the Chair and Vice Chairs to say, yay, that's what we spoke about? Send it to Cabinet, please.
I've got all of it written down, Chair. I will just attempt to run through it to give a bit more clarity about where I think we're going, and certainly, yes, with a view to the committee delegating authority to yourself and the Vice Chairs to sign off a report to go to Cabinet. So I think the committee is recognising that the transformation programme has made progress, and it was positive about the the work done by the transformation team to achieve that. I think you're also recognising that there's an 8.5 shortfall forecast for this year end, and I think you made the point that what had been done so far to achieve £29 million saving needed to be carried on to avoid leaving a shortfall at the year end, as it wouldn't be a good situation to simply have to move that forward into next year's budget. I think on a related note to that last point, it was made earlier in the discussion then by Councillor Stamber at the end, that further transformation projects that may be identified need to be realistic and need to have a beneficial effect on services, and given that we can't repeat the situation of having projects that prove not to be deliverable at all or deliverable to a different timescale than was originally intended. There were various points made along the theme of maintaining the momentum of the transformation programme, ensuring that there's any changes in in the senior management of that are seamless and don't affect its momentum as part of coming under local government, the wider local government reorganisation programme. And then there was the point about the committee would like to see the draft budget as a whole developed with the same rigour and intelligence as seems to apply to the development and monitoring of the delivery of transformation programme projects. There was a couple of further information requests, so asking for the dashboards on all of the transformation programme projects, unless that is an unrealistic amount of information, in which case the committee can provide further, can consider what it wants more specifically. More information about the weekly project meetings.
I'm comfortable that you and Ben, when you get your heads together, you'll thrash out all the things that we discussed, and I say if you just prepare something for the Vice Chairs and myself, okay. I'm confident we can move forward. Okay, any last comment? We move on. Agenda item 6.7 is the work programme. Do you want a 5-minute break or should we carry on? 5-minute break, okay.
Not sure what we'll do to the webcam.
I'll take advantage of that myself.
Oh, pre-meeting.